Hey guys, welcome back to another DAC mod, a video where we talk about one of my mods, and typically when you click on one of these videos, we're talking about a gun. But today, that is not the case. Instead, we're going to be checking out my explosive pack. This is going to come jam-packed with 17 brand new throwable weapons, 13 of which are explosive, with 4 bonus throwing weapons that happen to be a little bit different, but still something familiar to you Fallout fans, especially fans of New Vegas. So the aim of this mod is to bring back not only some classic throwing weapons and explosives, but also some brand new creations that are pretty fun and I think fit well alongside all of the other mods in this pack, and some of the vanilla options as well. Trying to fill in any of those niche holes in the sandbox that explosives didn't have in the base game. For example, there's pretty much a throwing explosive and a mine version of every damage type you could feasibly think of. We have plasma grenade and plasma mines, we have the regular standard grenade and mine, we have the Nuka grenade and mine, same for pulse. But we only have a Molotov cocktail. That didn't sit right with me, so of course we had to recreate the classic New Vegas Incendiary grenade, and to go with it, we even made an Incendiary mine to match. Now, if you could imagine filling holes like that, you can kind of picture what we did with the rest of this mod, but I also threw in a fun couple of goodies that were either cool experiments to try something new that maybe hasn't been done before, or just stuff that was fun for me. Either way, I think you're going to have a lot of fun with this mod. I'll give a quick overview right now of what's going on, but the rest of the video will be a showcase of every single explosive, exactly how it works. Some of them are going to be a bit more standard and obvious for how they work, but some of them are pretty cool and pretty unique. I really hounded Pig on this one, and we brought in some scripters to help out to make this a really cool pack that works much cooler than your typical explosive pack that's just going to be a slight variation on an explosive. Some of these can be used in fun and creative ways that I think open up the sandbox into new possibilities. A quick spoiler for one is we added a time bomb, which sounds simple enough, but it's more like a mine, but rather than being triggered by proximity, you throw it down like a mine and then it takes some time to explode. Quite a bit of time, in fact, which is another thing we'll get to here in a second. But when you have the mine on the ground, it's actually an interactable object, so you can pick it up and throw it as if it were a traffic cone or one of the other static objects around the map that you can pick up and throw, the ones that have physics anyways. So you can grab the time bomb after you've set it down and then chuck it around a corner if you know there's some guys through a window. There's all kinds of fun things you can do with that one and then make your escape while still maintaining a good bit of stealth. And I think that's a fun way to use it. That particular weapon also has some other niche things about it that are really cool. One thing that we need to talk about with this mod, though, is we found a way to change something that we didn't know we could change. In the base game, all explosives are locked to a maximum timer of 4 seconds, which is really weird because all explosives in the base game are only set to 2.5 seconds. Even still, when we tried to max out the time for our time bomb by setting it to, say, 10 seconds, that didn't work because the maximum possible time was 4 seconds. Turns out this is actually a global setting you can just change, so this mod will do that. It's not going to impact any of your other explosive mods or change anything with the base game. It's just going to set the maximum time to be higher, where the standard values of the base vanilla weapons will remain the same. It makes no changes behind the scene, and it's quite frankly a really weird decision made on Bethesda's part. I guess they didn't plan on having any long-term explosives, but it is still a bit of a weird one, especially when things like the long-fused Dynamite exist in New Vegas. Now, one of the main goals with my explosive pack, I have played with a handful of explosive packs in the past, and I have enjoyed them quite a bit. It's made me want to make my own for quite some time. But one thing I wanted to achieve with ours is trying to make it match vanilla, which, as you know, is something I try to do the best that I can with my guns. Obviously, there's some new stuff with our guns, like thermal scopes that don't belong in the vanilla game, or rather, aren't there. But I try to at least have vanilla-style balancing and a semi-vanilla aesthetic while trying to be a little bit better here and there. When it comes to the explosives, we wanted to make sure that they were balanced well, integrated into the level list so you will find them on enemies, and they are craftable at the chemistry station, which normally I don't really care for chemistry station crafting, but that's how it works in vanilla. In vanilla, you will be able to craft the vanilla explosives if you get the correct perks of the Demolition Expert, but it's going to work the same for our mod. So as you get Demolition's expert perks, these will start opening up in the chemistry station just like they did in vanilla, with vanilla-friendly crafting recipes. Now there's one small change that we did, which is a couple of throwables that are not explosive Instead of requiring the explosive expert perk, they will require the blacksmith perk. Things like the throwing knives and throwing axes, we thought that made a bit more sense, but they will be in the same categories as the rest of these explosives, so as not to clutter your workbench with a bunch of new categories. One last thing, I did mention that these were integrated into the level list, so you'll find them on enemies around the world. You'll find raiders using these things. We also added a vendor, which seems like a weird choice for a mod like this, but the reason was, there's no explosive vendor in the base game. There's weapon vendors and there's armor vendors, but for a mod like this where you really want to try out every single weapon, there's not really a place that's dedicated to buying explosives. You just kind of hope that Arturo might be selling one or two, or that you find them on a raider, or maybe have to craft them. But maybe you don't want to spec into the explosive build, or, you know, maybe it's just too rare to find these on your typical vendors. So now we have a vendor who exclusively sells explosives. So the chances of finding these is going to be very, very high. Matter of fact, he's guaranteed to sell one of each of these anytime you visit, but he may sell more, and he will also sell the vanilla explosives as well. Nothing too broken. You're not going to be able to buy 12 of these at a time, but he will be guaranteed to sell at least one if you want to try out any of these mods. He does come with custom voices, and he's at his own location. I'll probably show that off later in the video. But first, let's actually talk about every single explosive in this mod, because there's a lot to cover, and they all do very cool and different things. Okay, actually I lied. We're going to check out that location of the store quick, because it's really going to take no time at all. If you head over to Mystic Pines, just outside of Lexington, and look to the north, you will see a big power pylon, and right underneath that is a new shack, which has a vendor that you can, of course, purchase explosives from. Not much more to check out there. They're a vendor, they sell explosives. That's really it. Alright, now on to the good stuff. Starting off with our first explosive here, which inspired the entire pack, a stick of dynamite. Balanced with the idea that it is going to be weaker, but available earlier than the frag grenade, so it will do less damage, but they should be popping up a bit earlier in your game, and they should be pretty plentiful, kind of similar to how it was in New Vegas. Pretty simple stuff. There are quarries and other things like that around Boston, so I think this was a good fit for the game. In terms of what this thing actually does, it's a pretty standard explosive. The one thing that makes it cool and unique is that we did get a working fuse that glows and emits sparks and even has a nice little noise when you ignite it, and when it is thrown, you can actually hear it kind of ticking down. So let's go ahead and check that out. Pretty simple stuff. It's a stick of dynamite. I believe it also has a slightly longer fuse than the frag grenade does. I think the frag grenade is about 2.5 seconds, and I think this one is at about 4. Now then, of course, if we're going to have a stick of dynamite, we need a dynamite bundle, which is quite literally just the stick of dynamite, but tripled. It has triple the damage, and it costs 3 dynamite to craft if you are going to craft it. Pretty simple stuff. It's a higher-end explosive for the early game, but a bit of an expensive one because you're going to have to sacrifice a lot of your sticks of dynamite to get a bigger one. Or who knows, maybe you'll get lucky and find this on a raider. As for the actual feature here, it's not going to look much different from the dynamite because the dynamite killed him last time, so this is probably going to kill him too. And maybe this guy. Cool. Well, at least that helps shows us the radius a little bit. The wandering settler there decided they wanted to be part of the demonstration. Let's try out something a little bit different. One of our mines. Here we have the Demolition charge, which you may recognize from one of the Fallout New Vegas DLCs. A very, very packed explosive mine. This is going to be one of the most basic explosives in our pack. I'm saving the really interesting stuff for later, of course. This thing is going to be a pretty standard explosive mine with some pretty high damage. That's about it. That's what it does, and it does it pretty well. Of course, to show this off, we're going to have to toggle the AI back on so that they actually run towards us and set off those mines. If they run towards us, that is. Come on. It's right there. Oh, don't do this. I have one backup mine just in case this happened. Huh. Alright, we're taking the mines to the assault. Mines are always a little funny and finicky in the open world. It definitely is going to suit you better in hallways and corridors and buildings. But you could always plant it around the corner of something as well. But yeah, it's a mine. Not much going on there. We have more interesting stuff here in a second. Like here's one of our most interesting additions here. We have the sticky grenade, which is sticky for a couple of reasons. For starters, it is a stick grenade, but also it will stick to enemies thanks to these pretty crude spikes sticking out of it. So when you throw this, it will actually latch onto any enemy that you throw it at, and it will begin beeping. And once it stops beeping, it will explode. Pretty fun stuff. You think of maybe Thermite from Helldivers or a plasma grenade from Halo, but this one is going to be a pretty standard explosive, aside from the fact that it of course sticks to enemies. But it also has the added bonus that when somebody is stuck, they will start screaming and running around because they are scared of what's about to happen to them, which is a pretty fun effect that not only is going to do a lot of damage to them, potentially even maybe, end the enemy, but it will also stun them for a little while, so you don't have to worry about them fighting you. You can focus at other targets for a second while they run around and deal with the grenade that is now stuck to them. Let's go ahead and check this one out. So here we have our willing participant. And as you can see, it sticks to them and is now beeping and now explodes. A pretty simple grenade, but I'm sure you want to see what it looks like when somebody actually has their AI turned on and has to deal with one of these when they very much don't want to. So here we are with our next participant, and just like before, we need to turn on the AI, and let's go ahead and see how he reacts to the sticky grenade.
Fuck this! I'm out!
It seems that he didn't want to participate anymore once he was stuck. So yeah, that's a pretty fun one. Pretty cool. Took a bit of scripting to get it all working, but overall, a pretty fun grenade. Let's keep moving on. Here's a pretty fun one. We have an impact grenade, something featured in a lot of video games nowadays, but nothing like this in vanilla, aside from the Molotov, but I don't think I really count that. This thing is as simple as it sounds. You throw it and it will explode the moment it touches something. You don't have to wait for any timers. It's great for combat if you're trying to be really fast and hit something immediately. Sometimes those timers on the regular grenades can be a bit finicky and hard to use because the AI moves around a lot, but this one will make sure that they don't. Here we have our Raider, and here we have our grenade. Pretty simple stuff. Moving on down the line here, we do have an Incendiary grenade, modeled after the one from New Vegas, and it works pretty much the same, with a couple of minor differences. For example, a sort of thermite effect, kind of how you would see in a real incendiary grenade. So we tried to match that best we could, and I think we came out with something pretty dang cool. Simply throw this thing anywhere where enemies are, and unlike the Molotov, this one does have a timer, so it is a little bit different for that reason. And back up a little bit. As you can see, they didn't even die immediately. The initial explosion did a good bit of damage, but the continuous fire there seemed to hurt them over time and ended up being what did them in, so that is pretty interesting. Cool little effect. I'm not going to spend too much time going over the mine variant because it's pretty much the exact same explosion, but on a mine. So we don't need to do that. We can just go ahead and skip on to the next one. Now, the next one is known as the Makeshift grenade, which was originally supposed to be called the Tin Can grenade, but I guess there was some error made when this mod was created in the ESP work. But this is based on the Tin Can grenade from New Vegas, with some minor alterations to the design, including a fuse instead of a pin, and the funny boom that I wrote on here just because I felt like it, I guess. This thing, similar to the Dynamite, does have a lit spark and noise, so that is pretty cool. It is going to be the weakest of all of the grenades here, but definitely one of the most visually interesting, and easiest to craft. So if you're in the early game and you need explosives for your explosive character, this might be your go-to guy for the early game. Functionally, though, it's gonna be a grenade. This one is, again, one of the less interesting ones in terms of actual effectiveness, but boy, it looks cool. But as you can see, it doesn't do a ton of damage. This guy does have a good bit of heavy armor on, so he's going to deal with this a bit better than some of the other grenades, but, you know, it's a grenade. It's going to help in the early game. The early game enemies aren't going to have armor the way that this guy has, but this should do him in. There you go. Pretty cool stuff. Now we actually do have a variant of the Tin Can grenade, which is the Nail Bomb, which, as you can see, is covered in nails. This thing is going to do more damage, it's also going to do bleed damage, and it is going to launch out nail projectiles in every direction that could actually hit the enemies and deal even more damage beyond the initial explosion. And if it happens to finish them, it will also pin limbs to walls, sort of like the nail gun or the railway rifle in the vanilla game. Pretty cool. Okay, so this sucks. I actually missed a really cool recording because the hotkeys on my OBS malfunctioned. I got a really good take of the nail bomb working exactly as intended, where the damage over time from the bleed effect actually is what ended the enemy, but it didn't get captured. So let's try to recreate that here. Haven't had luck with some of the past recordings, but maybe this one we will. I'm going to throw it off to the side a little bit to see if the projectiles are what hits this guy. And as you can see, his health is actually ticking down over time thanks to that bleed effect. It's very minor because this guy does have a good bit of health. He's a bit of a higher level raider, but maybe a closer one will really show it off. As you can see there, his health was going down a little bit, but it stopped once again. It doesn't last forever, but it does do just enough to actually make a difference, especially on lower level enemies when you'll probably be using this thing. But let's go ahead and finish him off with this last one here. I think the explosion is going to do it, so I'm going to try to throw it off a little bit to the side, see if we can catch him with one of these projectiles. And upon investigation, I don't actually see any of the nails, but there are some here in the floor, as well as probably, yeah, in the wall. There's a nail. So it does actually shoot out projectiles, which is a pretty cool effect of this one. Rare that it'll work, but when it does happen, it's pretty neat. Now here's something that's pretty interesting. We have military dynamite. Turns out while we were doing research for this mod, which is a hard thing to research, mind you, there are some military variants of dynamite, probably used for taking out big chunks of land, terraforming mountains, stuff like that, I imagine maybe for FOBs. I'm not sure what its applicable use would be in the real world, but in our mod, this stands as a higher damage dynamite that has some other extra effects like ragdoll to the enemies, which is pretty fun. For the most part, it's just a direct upgrade to the dynamite. I believe this is better than the frag grenades, at least that's what I had intended. And, of course, it's going to trigger that ragdoll, which is pretty helpful as well. If you throw this into a batch of enemies, it might buy you a couple of seconds to do whatever you need to do to get the edge in that situation. Here's hoping it doesn't take care of him right off the bat. I'll throw it off to the side even, just to show off that ragdoll effect. Hopefully this works. No, it just did what it does. Maybe we need a beefier enemy. Here we are with a friend who's a bit bigger. Let's go ahead and see if this is a little bit more effective of showing off that fun ragdoll effect. And there you go. Such a heavy explosive that it knocks him off of his feet. Pretty simple stuff. Not much more to talk about there. Or maybe there is. Here you can actually get a look at how much damage this does to a bigger enemy, like a glowing Deathclaw. What if we were to up it to the military dynamite bundle, which of course is just going to be the exact same effect, similar to the previous dynamite, but with that ragdoll and much more explosive power. Let's see how it fares against our big friend here. Much more damage. This is probably something you'll be wanting to seek out in the high levels of the game, which is great, because now you have a reason to want to farm these sticks of dynamite and combine them together to a much larger package. And when the ragdoll effects with the explosion on death, well, sometimes it's pretty fun. I've had some Deathclaws launch high up in the air because of it, and when that does happen, it's a pretty cool thing to see. Now this next one is pretty funny. Here we have the smoke grenade. Something that might not be super effective compared to the other grenades in this pack, but it does actually do something. If you hit anybody within the radius of this smoke grenade, it will of course throw up a huge plume of smoke, and it will give anybody in that smoke a -10 to perception. So theoretically, their ability to track you and see you will be reduced significantly, and you might be able to make an escape if you're trying to play a stealthy character, because not everything in this pack needs to be super loud and explosive. There are actually some stealth-focused weapons here too, starting off with this one. Now obviously we're not going to be showing much of a damage test here, but at the very least you can see what it looks like when you throw one of these things. It's a pretty big smoke grenade, and it did do a little bit of damage to him, so there is that. But more importantly, like I said, it will give a -10 to their perception, theoretically giving you the chance to get away if necessary. Potentially. Possibly. Now, speaking of those stealth options, let's check out the throwing knife. Modeled pretty similarly to what it looked like in New Vegas. Not exactly one-to-one, but pretty dang close, with some minor upgrades to the design, as well as some brand new textures that make this thing fit perfect for Fallout 4. This thing is going to work exactly like you think it would. It's a throwing knife. It sticks into enemies, and it makes them go ouch. So let's go ahead and check that out. Once again, another willing participant to this study. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we throw a knife at him.
Again. Do it again.
It does a bunch of damage, and it hurts him pretty bad. But theoretically, you're going to be getting a much better bonus when you are in stealth. Of course, I'm not right now, but in theory, it'll do a whole lot. And of course, since it is sticking in them, you can retrieve them as well, which makes them pretty cool as a viable stealth survival option. Now then, if the throwing knife were the early game stealth option, then the throwing axe is the late game option. A much heavier object, providing a much heavier damage to the enemy. And besides that, it functions pretty much the same, except there is one really cool thing about the throwing axe, which I will show off in just a second, that makes it stand out and feel really, really special. At least to me. Here we are with our target. We'll go ahead and throw an axe at him and see what happens. And sadly, the damage doesn't show as more on the health bar, but this is a higher level raider. The last one I think was just a raider. This is a raider survivalist, which is more of an endgame raider. But you gotta trust it is doing more damage. The damage readout was right there on the preview screen, but it does work. And it does really hurt them. So, they are totally functional as weapons. A great thing to bring with you if you're not a fan of explosives, but still want something to throw at your enemies. Plus, it leaves for some pretty funny bodies, and much like the other ones, you can of course retrieve these as well. Now, something that makes the throwing axe special to me is that we figured out how to make spinning projectiles, something that was planned for Far Harbor, but apparently never got figured out by the time of release. So when we throw this axe, rather than being a straight projectile like it would normally be, like say the throwing knife, this thing actually does spin, which is pretty fun. That may not seem like a big deal, but trust me, this is harder than you think. And it works. And that's really cool. And even though it spins, every time you hit a wall, it is actually going to embed in a way that makes sense. Which is also really cool. You're never going to see this thing sticking in through the wooden handle or anything like that. Pig did a great job on this one. It's the attention to little details like that that I think make the throwing axe shine. Now, so as to not waste your time, I'm going to speed through the next couple because they are pretty much similar to the last ones. There is a poisoned variant of the throwing knife and throwing axe, much like there was in New Vegas. You can see a little bit of the poison goop on here. It's going to be the same thing, plus poison damage. We don't really need a demo for that. I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. Even still, here's a look at the throwing axe with poison on it, which has a lot of poison on it, because it's a poisoned throwing axe. What else can I say? Now then, that actually takes us to our last weapon, which is going to be the time bomb. Now, visually, it's not that crazy. It's the triple stack of dynamite that we had before with a timer on it. Pretty simple stuff. But this thing actually is pretty unique. You notice that it has a damage of 1. That's because we had to do some funky stuff, so don't let that fool you. It has a separate explosion which is tied to some scripting because of how I wanted it to work. So thanks to Pig for putting up with me and all of my wants for this time bomb, because now it is something much more special because of it. Now, at first glance, this may seem pretty simple. I'm going to throw it down, and it is going to be pretty snazzy because it has its own custom sound effect, and it's going to take a while to explode. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. As you can see, it has some nice ticking, and if we back up a little bit, it also rings at the end of the egg timer and then explodes. A pretty simple time bomb, which initially was just the idea that it was sort of an in-between of a grenade and a mine. You throw it down like a mine, but it takes a while to explode, and it's not triggered off of proximity. It's pretty cool alone like that, but it does have one other extra feature. While it's ticking and making all that noise, it does attract enemies. So as a stealth character, you can throw this down in one room, and as it starts ticking, an enemy will start heading towards it, and you can maneuver around, and by the time they go and find it, it's going to explode right in their face, which is pretty cool. That might be a little bit hard to showcase here, because anytime I spawn an enemy, they're going to know where I'm at, but let me see if I can get something working. So yeah, guys, that is the explosive pack. 17 wonderful weapons in here, all of which I think are really, really cool. I hope you guys enjoy this. Try my best to make this as vanilla friendly as possible while still giving you a ton of cool toys to play with, so I hope you guys enjoy. It will be linked down in the description as always, and if you enjoy my work, whether it's the videos I do here on YouTube or over on the Nexus, consider supporting it. You can do so by liking the video or endorsing the mod for free, or you can of course check me out on Patreon if you'd like to do a more direct donation to help out what I'm doing over here. That is of course completely optional, not something that you should feel like you need to do, something that is there for those of you who want to. But by no means should you. Now then, I hope you guys enjoyed once more, and I will see you all in the next one. Peace!